Awesome. Welcome, everybody. This is the Temple of Hermes. Me and my friend Jake here are going to do this podcast probably every 2 weeks or something, maybe every week if we get time, I don't know, which is going to focus on ancient astrology and this old tradition where our modern astrology comes from. And we really want to give you guys the best free source, really, on this ancient science, because from what I've noticed, there's nothing on the internet generally, and there's nothing even in books unless you know exactly where to look. So hopefully this will provide a really, really thorough introduction to the real state that our knowledge of astrology is in. And yes, it will be much better than the other ancient astrologers. So with that, I'm Julian, and I am a ancient Babylonian astrologer, as my ancestry would like. My grandmother is from Iraq, and I learned with Rumen Kolev, who is, his credentials are very numerous, but he's essentially the foremost scholar in especially ancient astrology in the whole world. He's easily the most thorough source I have ever come across, and that's of course why I studied with him. So that is where I come from. Babylonian Greek astrology is my focus. That's me, and I'll let Jake introduce himself, and then we'll jump right into the topics, we'll look at Babylonian astrology or Babylonian mysticism, I've written here. Jake will go through quite an interesting further timeline of astrology, which starts in 27,000 BC. And then I'll look at the house system that the ancients used, which is the most accurate house system. And Jake will jump into the difference between the two major zodiacs that are used in astrology. So that is the outline. There'll be timestamps in the description if you want to jump to those. Now I'll let Jake introduce himself, and then I'll, after that, jump into Babylonian mysticism. Off you go, my friend.
Oh, cheers. Well, my name is Jacob Waddell, and I am a practitioner of ancient astrology, herbalism, and energy healing. It's interesting when you said fulfilling in sort of ancestral loins. It sort of reminded me, I guess, of just the way I approach astrology, and I think it instantly allowed me to see clearly, but I really approach it in almost a real Celtic Druidic fashion, in the sense where, you know, I see more value in conveying it in story and in, I guess, poetry, to sort of a sense, you know, and whether or not I end up writing this stuff down, it might be a flawed part of my ancestors too. But I guess, yeah, I've studied with a few different astrologers, my grandmother being my first one. I started being taught on the ropes. She's more of a tropical modern astrologer, however, but on the ropes when I was around 6 or 7. But it's around when I was 17 or I got introduced to another modern astrologer, where even her, I remember she couldn't help but mention that she had slightly been studying into the Sidereal, and she may think it might be a bit accurate, but she wouldn't actually tell us too much. And then I was the first seed. I was like, maybe there's something to that, like, you know, the Vedic do that, don't they? And so next thing you know, I had stumbled upon a few different things. I had studied with a astrologer called a Chudabhava, or Alan Alibos, now Chudabhava. He does a sort of Hellenistic ancient astrology, but still on the tropical lens. But yeah, now that I've met Julian, Rumen Kolev has definitely blown my mind with just the Babylonian lens of analysis. But yeah, take it from here, Jul.
For sure. Awesome. I look forward to it. Wow, we're starting Babylonian mysticism at 4:20, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. So it's going to be a very mystical experience, that's for sure. So yeah, that's awesome. We both have our roots in the ancient lens, and hopefully we can really we can bring this to the mainstream. So the Babylonian mysticism is really, really detailed and really deep, and it's a real position of research I mean, even for academics at the moment, it's absolutely astounding the amount of work that still needs to be done, translating tablets and figuring out what they actually mean and then using them. I mean, it's the work is unbelievable. What you guys see on my screen at the moment is Jake's beautiful face, but you're also seeing, this is a timeline. Ruman used this to show a timeline of the Golden Age. We'll cover this more in future episodes, why this is the Golden Age astrologically, which is really pretty interesting stuff. But you see here, this is the rainfall, the fecundity of the climate, so the fertility of the climate. So here in about 3500 BC, it's at its maximum, which is about the time of this thriving Babylonian astrology of the Golden Age, where they were observing the sky directly. This is why I called it Babylonian mysticism, because it's not just maths and working things out in your head. They were the last civilization that we know in history that preserved this practice of observing the real sky in real time, which of course is what all astrology should aspire to be. All the programs and stuff that you see, all that stuff is just it's just a small recreation of the sky. If you could have an exact image of what the sky looked like at your birth, this is the best tool for astrological use that you can imagine. So this is what the Babylonians were doing, and the earliest official academic record of Babylonian astrology and astronomy is 5500 BC, with the founding, with the well, we know this from, again, Reuben Kohler. He found this text called the Babylonian Astrolabe, which some other scholars had dated to, somewhere here in Sargon the Great's time, but actually the correct dating is here in 5500 BC. So this is official academic record here. So it's pretty ancient stuff, and you can see there are lots of changes here. I think there was a deluge somewhere here in ancient Babylon, and then around this time, they called it the science of Hermes was resurrected, and then we have this golden age of Mesopotamian astrology. If you follow this graph as well, you see another sort of mini golden age comes here at the time of Hellenistic times, of Greece, ancient Greece, and of Alexander the Great, when he went to Mesopotamia, to Babylon, and he took many scholars with him, and they were correlating the Greek mythology with the Babylonian mythology, and the Greek astrology with the Babylonian astrology. And he brought a lot of this science back into Greece. Obviously, he didn't, because he died there, but you know what I mean. So this is very interesting. And then we've entered this dark age, which is why modern astrology and all the rest of it is kind of, well, it's not so connected to God. Here is the Babylonian astrolabe. Don't worry about understanding it. It is bloody complicated, but it gives you an idea of the depth of this science that was happening back then and the complexity of the minds behind it. Yeah, and it's pretty unreal. I'll come back. You guys can briefly look at Jake again. So it's there's the history of it, and this thing about the observation of the sky is really powerful, because we have had no accurate observations of the sky for about probably over 2,000 years. Even the ancient Greeks didn't have an accurate observation of the sky. They knew about these phases and things and the visibility, but they didn't bother looking for it and actually recording it, whereas the Mesopotamians did. They had this culture where the priests would wake up 2 hours before the sunrise, take ritual bath, and they would engage in prayers and rituals and burn incense and things like this to God. And then they would go out into the sacred place where you can see the whole sky and observe the whole sunrise, all the stars, meteors, shooting stars, all these things, birds flying, all this was omens for them. And this is how sacred their practice was in those times. So my goal, hopefully, and I'm trying to get my sleep schedule to match this, but my goal, hopefully, is to be part of reviving this ancient science and really bring back the sacredness of our connection with the sky, which is the spirit, which is God. That's really what I'm here for. So there's a little piece about Babylonian mysticism and the real Babylonian astrology. You won't hear about that in any other source. So I hope that was an interesting piece. And here I will pass it over to Jacob, and he will give you his timeline, which is also very cool piece to look at. So take it away, my friend.
Well, it's awesome there to put that into perspective, because I was just thinking about the fact that almost every culture has first thing they did at the end of the day. What would they do? Yeah. Look up at the sky. And I guess being Mesopotamia being one of these first civilizations which sort of did a lot of major great things, they had a great record of this. But this is something humans have always done. And even though I haven't got some timelines and some of these star laws, for example, almost every culture has a star law relating to the Pleiades. I only recently found out that the Australian Indigenous have a very similar story about the Pleiadian sisters, them being emus instead, and that's for another time though. But however, I do have some dates that we can sort of run by. This is more of a system that sort of more looks towards, a little bit of including the Babylonian, more sort of looking to the Hellenistic and the timeline and Western astrology and sort of how we got here. Because I think it's really important to sort of look at how did we forget about all this? How did we get so lost in doctrine that really doesn't really explain why the doctrine's there? So, first of all, we've found, I forgot where this was located, but about in 27,000 BCE, there was a lunar lunar notation engraved in a stone found, somewhere in Europe it was, but it was having to do with the menstrual cycle of a woman. Now, first of all, when we look at this, as I was just saying to Julian before we hopped on here, this just shows to me that it would seem to be that is a matriarchal astroculture at first, if we're going to look at the evidence that we have here. And that somewhere along the line, the split came, and then it became very much the patriarchal priesthood sort of thing that we observed, and became very refined, but, like we can see, this was a very practical calendar, and this was, I guess, the woman's observation, because they're picking up to the moon. And this also shows where the moon was very much a more of a emphasis in astrology, where now it isn't, because most of us, when we start astrology, we think, what's your sun sign, what's your star sign, like we don't ever think about this moon when it's the closest thing to us, so that's another interesting thing that we got to keep in mind, that the earth and the moon is the closest thing to us. And like you said about the Babylonian priests, taking even and counting the birds, that's part of earth, that's part of the whole omen, and to really don't chuck out the baby of the bathwater per se, like there's a whole thing going on here in UNICEF. And nevertheless, I'll try to skip over maybe the Babylonian dates since you've covered them, but it was around that timeline with Alexander the Great where it started to become spread to Persia. But before then, where's the dates for this again? So it was around 550 BCE, the Greeks started taking up astrology, where they were the actual inventors of the horoscope and the 12 house system for reading a chart. And this was something that they implied and brought back, and this is what Alexander the Great brought back to Persia. And it's really interesting because this is something throughout the whole known ancient world was used. In fact, Vedic astrologers used the 12 house system. The Babylonians still had the 12 zodiac signs, but it was the horoscope that was sort of pitched by the Greeks. And this was a really interesting way of sort of putting it. Now, this lineage of Hellenistic revival of astrology, some say Hermes brought it, or Asclepius, and these, some astrologers or some astro historians say other things, the ones that are a little bit more atheistic by book, maybe, and I don't want to believe that there was some special beings here sharing some light and information on the light above. But nevertheless, yes, so Alexander the Great, major key into the Greek information, then coming back into the home of ancient astrology, where we also had sages and mystics from all parts of the, so we had Egyptians, we had also like northern, all of the Scythians, we had and of course the Indians as well. So we had this big melting pot of knowledge going on here. And it's interesting that, we've always going to have the same themes between the gods. Now, I've been recently delving into the Vedic, and I don't have too much of a timeline for these guys, but I'll stick to now what happened to the Europeans. Now, Christianity, big one, because that's the one that really flipped the script on astrology for us. Now, it was from, what was his name? Constantinople, wasn't he? That was the bloke, he's the bloke, that brought Christianity to the whole empire, and ever since that sort of movement, the astrologers and the mystery schools of Europe had to sort of flee, from these Hellenistic Latin-based astrologers. But luckily, there was already sort of a known connect to the east in Persia, where all these refugees, these Greek scholars, pretty much fled back to Persia, and we had also the Greek philosophers. We had all these sacred holy texts brought back. And it's interesting because throughout history we've seen this back and forth tick for tat of knowledge being brought back and forth to the Holy Land. Now, it wasn't until maybe the Crusades that this information actually got back to Europe. And in fact, it was the Greek philosophers. A lot of the texts were all in Arabic. They had to be translated back to Latin. And this was the same for our astrological texts as well. But it was around this time in the 1400s where we then had Latin Christendom pretty much deciding, well, what astro treatises do we let in? And this is where they adopted the Ptolemaic sort of more simpleton way of looking, and but it was still in this time period where, as I said, the 1400s, the Renaissance was starting to become about, and rationalism was being birthed, and it just became, obviously they didn't, there was, as we all know, Babylonian astrology did seep its way into Europe, and it was on the hush hush, but a lot of the times, a lot of people weren't going to get information towards that. So astrology became relatively obsolete, this tropical model, in the Middle Ages up until the Renaissance, like astronomy became then the big thing, and the Western mind sort of deluged off mysticism. The Gnostic had been beaten out of us so much so, and we were left nothing but just an overthinking rationalist that, was so fed up with the church that any hunt of God was not good enough for us. So we just forgot what we're looking at. But it was in the late 1800s where we had a revival, a spiritualist revival of the occult practices, and whether it be Golden Age, New Dawn, like all of these. I won't even need to mention a lot of these names of these cults, religions, all these sort of pockets, right? But really, it's just a deluge back in time, because it was pretty much happening a couple hundred years before that, and these cyclical patterns. Now, what we're having here, having the next revival of astrology as we speak. But last century was when we had some of the biggest impacts. Now, as we were talking before in the late 1800s, this is when we also had Uranus discovered. Now, Neptune was discovered in the 1700s, like 1793, I think it was, something like that. But then we had Uranus discovered in the 1800s. Around the same time, electricity was discovered. And this is like where I always loved expressing this sort of statement, because for so long, the occultic astro sages would look on the sky and look on reality in general and see Saturn as the limit, right? Saturn being the edge of the universe, Saturn being your bones, your skin. But then upon discovering with more technology, Uranus, we also had microscopic technology to analyze our nervous system and analyze electricity and collective consciousness. And through this is just a clear example of just upon the discoveries on outer was always a discovery on the inner. And this is where then modern astrology then took a turn. Then as we started delving more on the inner, we got better at looking inwards. We started to then categorize the inner realms. And then we have then the likes of Carl Jung and other sort of, like pretty much just Carl Jung for a big part of it, because his impact of even coining the whole archetype thing really just took and separated astrology from a system which covered it all to then a psychoanalysis system which they didn't need to use that anymore. In fact, even in the word archetype, arc meaning bow, but bow also used to be the phrase which the sun would be described to travel across our ecliptic, our skyline. And it's interesting that the types of the bow. This is the archetype, and unconsciously or consciously, Carl Jung had did this. And now we're living in a point at which where, the astrologer doesn't know any, like modern astrologers are left to believe that this is what this is. It's just archetypes and how we're meant to navigate this, because we weren't left the tools to, or we don't think we were left tools to then navigate this point at which. And this is where we're at now, where we're having the revival, where there is some brilliant astro sort of historians and likes of your teacher doing the work.
Amen. Yes, so true. Yeah, it's so interesting how like we always think that history is this, we have this modern delusion that history, we started at some stone age down here, where we were smacking rocks together. If you read academic, astrological books and you see the timeline, they talk about mundane astrology, as if it was some kind of, that mundane astrology was birthed in Mesopotamia, and that was the start of the much more sophisticated science of modern psychoanalysis, or the much more sophisticated Greek astrology. And then, it's just embarrassing reading these they're not it started in Mesopotamia, but much more logically, the golden age was in Mesopotamia, and now we're in the dark age. You want to use modern astrology to predict something, you cannot do it. You actually can't. There's no hard and fast predictions with modern astrology. Maybe that's a bit absolutist, but from what I know anyway, it's very difficult to make a hard and fast.
And if it is, it's just because you're attuned to a system and your own intuition, really.
Yes,
it's just like people I've heard this was like something a tropical teacher told me. He said, it's just like, it's an oracle system, it's a divination. If you're working with it, you can get the answers from it. And that is true. But, are we trying to, that's when the question gets a little bit thicker than that. Is that really the right system to then use?
Exactly right. It's fascinating stuff. So I'll jump into a bit more of the details now of ancient astrology and the house system that they used, which is the whole sign, this is the Hermes house system, which was a whole sign house system, which means for every one house, it covers one sign. I'll show you guys what this looks like right now. You guys can see Jake's beautiful face again. So here is just the 12 signs. Let me take these planets off. And you can see this is the ascendant here, which is the sunrise, where the sun rises. And this is the descendant, where the sun sets. And this is the daytime, the cycle of the day here. So in this chart, I have tried to get it so that Leo is, here we go, Leo is on the ascendant. Leo is rising. And so as you can see, even though the ascendant is in the first degree of Leo, the whole first house is also covering Leo. And then the whole second house starts at 0 Virgo to the end of Virgo. Third house, 0 Libra to the end of Libra. And this will stay the same no matter where the ascendant is. So even if the ascendant is very late in the sign, still the first house is all of Leo, and the second house is all of Virgo. So this is the ancient house system, and Rumen showed some really interesting rationale for this, explanation of why this is the case. What is this one? This is the athletes. So this is a screenshot from one of his lectures. He is very generous, letting me use a lot of his stuff in what I share with you guys. So we have him to thank for a lot of this. And this is from the book. There's one book by Gauquelin. I'm not sure how to say the name. I think it's French, Gauquelin or something. And this is, it's a bit complicated here. I'll zoom in on it. But in essence, what is being shown is the position of Mars in the charts of athletes. And the higher these lines are, closer these lines are to the outside, the more Mars appears in that position. So look where these positions are the highest. It starts on the middle of the first house and goes and stays high until the end of the first house and drops pretty much instantly. And also at the position of culmination, it rises and is high frequency in the 10th house, which is the middle of the sky, the noon, where it's midday, the midday point. And so this Rumen says this is the most, this only works with this whole sign house system, because on average, the ascendant will be in the middle of the first house, which is somewhere here in where it says rise there. And he also shows, this is the charts of Mars in the charts of doctors. So very similar frequency in the 10th house and the first house. So I'll move this away from Jake. And this is Saturn in the charts of doctors as well. Very accurate, powerful. High in the 10th and all the way through the first house. And this is the basic idea of the Hermes house system. Very simple. The most powerful houses are the middle of the sky and the ascendant, the rising point, or the first house and the 10th house, most of the time. So yeah, this is how it's very, when you get to know it, it's very, very simple, which is the beauty of ancient astrology, honestly, that it's incredibly simple. I load up a chart. I love telling people this, that like when I read somebody's chart, I usually come away from it like an hour and a half session. I don't know their sun sign. I don't remember their sun sign. I don't remember their ascendant, and I don't remember their moon. Because I don't care. It doesn't matter. What matters is the ascendant with a star? Is the moon with a star? Is the moon in a powerful house? Is the sun in a powerful house? You know, yeah, the ascendant. You know, you may have the ascendant in Leo. Let's say you have Leo rising. To me, that means absolutely nothing. I mean, it means something. It means something, but it, you know, if I was to load the chart, I would not be looking for Leo rising or Cancer rising or Virgo rising. I would load the chart. Do you have the first part of Leo rising, the first 10 degrees? If you have that, then you have Regulus and Hydra. This is fame. This is leadership. This guy is a kingly, noble person, mostly. Do you have the second half of Leo rising? This will give almost always astrologers, people who are interested in hidden knowledge, secret knowledge. So it becomes much, it seems complicated at first, but it's actually much simpler. I don't have to worry about, well, because he's Leo rising and the sun is in this and the moon is in that and and it makes this combination. It's not, you know, if there's a combination in ancient astrology, it gives one, it produces one effect. Not many, many things. You know, they would say if you have this, this, and this, then one thing happens. It makes things much, much simpler. So I'll come back to this chart here. I'll actually show you my own chart so you can get an idea of what the whole sign, you know what, I'm just going to reload it, what it looks like, what an actual chart looks like under the whole sign system. I will make this a lot simpler for you guys. and take the images off as well. So this is probably what most of you are used to seeing. In fact, this is even deeper than what most of you guys are used to seeing. But you can see here my ascendant is here in the 5th degree of Leo. And the whole first house is Leo. The whole 12th house is Cancer, 11th house Gemini, 10th house Taurus. And yeah, this is basically how it works. I'm not sure if there's. I will give some examples here, which I thought were interesting. Like this is one of my friends. If you follow me for a bit, you know this chart already. But I thought this was really cool from that research that was given. He has Mars in the first house here, exactly in the position that you saw in that graph, where all the athletes have Mars, and he is like the fittest person I've ever known. Trains calisthenics, ripped to all hell, crazy guy, but athletic. Also, I'll show you the chart briefly of my mother, just to explain this as well. My mother was a doctor. Look, where's Saturn?
Bingo. Yep, right there.
Right in the meridian.
Yeah.
Where the doctors have Saturn. So it's pretty powerful stuff, this ancient house system. Yeah, it's simple. We're giving you guys the foundations at the moment. But yeah, that is, in my opinion, the best house system to use. I don't know many people who don't use that house system because it is just not only accurate, but simpler. So yeah, I hope that gives you some little interesting insights. I'll pass over to Jake again, and he will tell us about the tropical versus the sidereal zodiac. And if you want me to load up the chart and show some practical stuff,
man. That'd be a lot of just the
for sure. I will. Let me just. Cool. Yeah. So I'll share, and I'll just use my own chart again. And
all right.
Oops. I'll leave the planets on and everything. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Go for it.
Cool as. So like for most of us, we get taught we don't know anything else other than this zodiac and zodiac signs, and we learn that then in the equinox, that's when Aries comes about, where hasn't done that for thousands of years. And this is something that then, oddly enough, this is where astronomers would try to disprove and try to throw off astrology as a working divination system, because they point at this flaw out. And it's quite a mystery, honestly, how so many astrologers from the West are still ignorantly, not, I don't know, it's still, that's a beautiful thing. It's a divination system, and if you put your heart into it, you can get results, you can yield information, but at the end of the day, it's not really aligning to where anything is. For example, like you're delving into a lot of the time now, Julian, is that fixed stars, the position of individual unique stars within a constellation, has so much weight in a chart reading that this is another component which we've all forgotten about. We think that these bodies have energy. Now, I don't know, maybe it's the split between, I guess, this sort of Aristotle way of thinking in Europe, and that we sort of started thinking cause and effect, and if we can't sort of prove that these stars are causing something, then we chuck that idea out and we sort of don't look further into it, and instead of sort of realizing it that it's there's an omen, and this is the show you the reflection for what is going on, as above so as below. We really lost those principles in our sciences. There was sort of a split, and I guess the argument was, and I feel like the argument can really be argued in the Northern Hemisphere, for a lot of it is related more to the seasonal effects of the sun and the position of the sun rising in our sky and how high it can get. Now, the argument was that, we were aware as well that there isn't just 12 constellations on the ecliptic, right? There is not that, there's over 100, right? There's lots there. And, It's just that 12 is this mathematically precise perfect number. There is many different reasons why we delve into that, but nevertheless, dividing up the sky into 12 30-degree portions works really well. But, for example, like Virgo, it's not just, within 30 degrees, it expands beyond it. It's a very large constellation. And this is something where then, the ancient astrologers, because tropical astrology started getting practice sort of as they started to notice this precision of the equinox, they started to then be like, well, why does it matter then anyway? Because we're having to box in Virgo to 30 degrees and having to do all these other stars like this, then why should it matter? And I guess, this is partially because we disregarded and we didn't have maybe the initiation teachings to tell us about the individual star qualities, or tell us about the color of the stars and what their impact is, and all those array of these beautiful Babylonian omonic sort of techniques we can approach with. But yeah, and nevertheless, so like tropical astrology became this thing to then indicate the seasons. Nevertheless, wasn't actually something to do with the stars, and had more to do with seasons, and that in itself does have a divination purpose, and we can utilize it. And yeah, like for example, I was practicing as a tropical astrologer for many years. My grandmother's still practicing as a tropical astrologer, and I guess it's really hard for being, 30 years as an astrologer, a really great astrologer, and getting results and still doing things. But it's interesting that now it's quite funny that we've all noticed that it's a psychological thing, modern astrology, because through her career as an astrologer, she realized that she should delve into psychotherapy.
Wow.
She's actually she's in her 60s, but she's in university doing like a psychotherapy course, and like delving into that. So it's interesting. I guess this just shows where we're at as a culture. For example, in Vedic terms, they have a different way of approaching astrology, and they have very much a system designed for the culture of that subcontinent. Very much so that we look at the ancient astrology, for example, and the mundane astrology, and it was just like the roles are very simple because there wasn't so much diversity and versatility amongst culture. It was very chalk and cheese cut per se. And also maybe there was also a different philosophical understanding of life that you get on with it. You don't just look in and you try to draw pictures of yourself and like your different demons, your different angels that dwell inside. Yeah, you just get on with what you do, and like you see what you can do good at and you do it. I guess we see in the split though with like in places like India, for example, like places where there's arranged marriage, and there's also like the caste system only got banned in 1957, I think it was. So remnants of that still lingering around as well. And that another component is within that part of history is that the Aryan invaders of northern India brought astrology with them, right? And they brought the caste system with them. And interesting enough, a lot of Brahmin Astro families still inherit the last name Shokla, which means bright star, or no, not bright star, bright moon. The phase when the moon goes into full. So this is still a theme going on, and this is where maybe we can also see how regiment and how, because you, Julian, you've looked into Vedic astrology as well, and you look into it and you think, how do people get sophisticated in this? How did you delve into it? It's very hidden, very orchestrated, and I guess perhaps this is part of our own European history that we've not learnt about, and maybe there's some interesting things that aren't really written down that we may come across within our own lineages. But yeah, no, that's just my thoughts on it. Like, I mean, there's a few different things we can point out with there in the chart. Now, look, big thing is that the tropical sidereal, it's 25 degrees difference. Now, that leaves a little bit of room just in case. It's not a complete move back. Sometimes you may end up having, a degree maybe in the last components of a sign, and then that might punch it down into, let's say, 4 or 5 degrees early on to the sign. Why this is important to look at, though, is because, one, like it may be in a different sign. I think that's a very clear-cut one, but you know, that's still not clear cut enough for tropical astrologers. You know? So like, maybe not even delve into the sun and moon, but like I found within myself at least, because I had a Capricorn ascendant that was at 10 degrees, and I had to push it back into Sagittarius, and then, but it was one of these things, man, where, because I have a bit of a 12th house thing, but for so long when I looked into my tropical chart, I'd see Sagittarius as a how'd you put it? As it's my shadow. It's my 12th house. It's the thing that undid me. It pulled me apart. You know, where I never. But then I always felt I always felt still embodying that bombastic, you know, buddy, Sagittarian energy and sort of thinking, how am I not pulling my Capricorn head in? You know, like I know I've got to be serious about this. How am I going to make money? But interesting enough, it's because where does Capricorn literally sit for me? It sits more the second house of my value systems, of, you know, then also, you know, how I earn money, you know, and like as well, there's always going to be something that leads you back to your tropical chart. And this is something that I had to just bite the bullet with. And I feel it's something that a lot of people need to just, not to maybe force it, because that might scare you away again. But a big thing to remember is that these fixed stars that Julian does awesome readings for, shouting him out, you know, those degrees, very significant. And it's not just, you know, I've seen modern astrologers who do the whole, what sign is this degree mean, you know, and like that's just made up, that's just divination stuff. And that, hey, it works to a degree. It's divination, but it's still just fluff. It still doesn't actually have its roots in actual observation of the sky. And I guess this is where, like, I mean, also with the whole, you know, because some people then take on, I've seen a lot of new sidereal astrologers that they only discovered sidereal astrology because they got one of those apps on their phones where they can see the constellations, and they, oh my God, there's actually 13 constellations. You know, and like, and then like they have this whole thing, and you see like a debate pop up on your newsfeed every year or so. So, oh, there's actually 13 constellations. Like, yeah, nah. So, look, there's always going to be guaranteed more fluff pop up in the new age and the modern spiritual community, especially as astrology is having another rebirth. But this is why it's very important for us to be doing these services, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So just to graphically show what the difference is here, this is, you know what, maybe we'll take the planet. No, leave the planets in. This is a chart of my friend. He knows whose chart it is. And this is the tropical modern chart, right? So here you see the ascendant is in Capricorn, right here. This all this is in Gemini, and the sun is in Taurus, and the moon is in Aries. If we change to the sidereal zodiac, suddenly Sagittarius is the ascendant, the moon is in Pisces, and the sun is in Aries, and this stellium is in Taurus.
And it's which is the flavor up, but you know, it was one of these, like, for anyone that would look at this at a first glance, oh, that's a different chart, you know, it's still the same stellium, everything's in the same position in the sky. And that's the thing with tropical astrology. I think that's the only thing tropical astrologers still hang on to, is that at least they're putting them in the right houses. You know, because that actually does have place, you know, and when you do, at least you put a planet in the house where it did appear, that does actually show a divination, but not quite the picture. But you know, for me, as I was analyzing my tropical, I'd be like, well, Saturn rules my chart, and I'd look to then my Saturn in Gemini in the 6th, and I'm like, well, Gemini is then sort of the flavor, but then in the Sagittarian rising, it's like, well, Jupiter. See, and then that was a big thing, you know, Sagittarius and Saturn and Jupiter defining, well, what am I really embodying? And that was the real sort of flip for me, realizing that maybe, no, my fall is that scorpionic, subtle shit that I still be doing, you know, denying the hidden. You know, it's interesting too. It's hidden and it was very elusive, but nevertheless, then Jupiter became the ruler. But where does Jupiter sit? In Gemini. And still there it was, you know, that feeling of that, still embodying a bit of a Gemini and sort of flavor, but not understanding that it came from a more of a Jupiterian expansiveness, not a stellium expansiveness.
Yeah, interesting.
And I find that I've been able to do this sort of pattern with everyone's chart, that I've come across, whether or not, like, obviously when you look at fixed stars, then it gets a little bit different because, drastic difference, and it's a whole nother level to it. But generally, there is always a way to link back the same flavor of your tropical chart, the same psychological surface shit that you're able to find there, and you can bring it back to the sidereal. But then when you go to the sidereal, you actually are in the right training ground to then learn the fixed stars and the primary directions and all these other beautiful grand things.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's really interesting is these different zodiacs have different uses. Like in Babylon, you can see here on my program, there's 3 different zodiacs. We've got, this one is the tropical zodiac that you see here.
Yep.
This one is an ancient perfect zodiac, they called it, where if you see these dots here, they're in the middle of the signs.
Yeah, right.
These dots are the equinoxes and the solstices.
Ah.
Spring, summer solstice. So they put them in the middle of the sign for this zodiac. So this is another zodiac. And then we have the sidereal Babylonian zodiac, which is the real sky. So the one of the uses of the top of my head for the tropical zodiac is the exaltations.
Yes.
So the exaltations come from the tropical zodiac, not the sidereal. So if you have Jupiter in Cancer in the sidereal zodiac, I would venture to say it's not really an exaltation. I mean, it kind of is, because it's a, when the 2 zodiacs are perfectly aligned, Cancer, there's a whole complicated thing there. But Jupiter will be more, at the moment, will be more exalted in Gemini sidereally.
Yes.
And Saturn in Virgo and Mars in Sagittarius, Sun in Pisces, Moon in the Moon will be exalted in this area between Pisces and Aries, and so
See,
on.
that's a really good point you're bringing up there, Julian, because that's something I've noticed upon the Vedic system, is that they take in some, like, well, some of them that are worth their grain and salt, they've taken a note of the exaltations and all these other rules, but they're using the sidereal system, but not realizing where and what were these principles of exaltation meaning. Maybe it was the translations getting sort of mixed and swapped, who knows. But upon like, for me, for recently, it was only until you were sort of explaining it that like, the planet's exalting. It's literally, well, we actually think about, what does the word exalt mean? Like, we mean, don't do it well. That's what we all sort of think. But no, like, lift up, get a bit of a leeway. And so that was something that I guess we also, another point of which as well, that if we wanted to then, this is the trained psychological modern astrologer in me sort of still lurking and lingering out. But if we wanted to analyze Jupiter, for example, back in the day, Jupiter would do better in a sign like Cancer, because, put it this way, ancient, there's so much to ancient, right? But in the times where Jupiter was exalting in Cancer, wealth, abundance, and sort of spirituality and sort of everything good would come from family and from home and from the city and from, all those things. And things like God, for example, like talks of God would be a very homely thing. It'd be discussed in the community. Now, where would we see Jupiter exalt itself now? It exalts itself in the local neighborhood in discussion. We see that it's discussed in music. We see that it's a little bit, it's up for debate now. It's in a mercurial sign. God is talked about like nothing else now, in all sorts of manners, disagree or not agree. And that's where it should be nowadays, though, because if we were still going to have Jupiter exalting in Cancer, getting all hung up on family values, like these back motherland values, it just doesn't work anymore. As much as we all, see, that's the thing, somewhere in us we still feel like Cancer is the exalted place of Jupiter, even if we don't know what astrology is. And that's the interesting thing. And this is where we can also observe maybe that's a part of the process of shifting from tropical to the now sidereal, is that we evolve our collective consciousness out of a slumber.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And then pull it
Interesting.
out of it, because it seems to be that when did the development of astrology cease? This Roman time, man.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
We're still living in this sort of post-Roman sort of, slumbered out age.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We are totally under the Roman cult influence. Absolutely. Because that's what America is. Anyway, let's not dive into that. I think we have come to the point where we're done. We've said
Yeah,
everything to say. That was a great first episode. That was
awesome.
sick. Thank you for joining us in the Temple of Hermes, everybody.
Yes.
Let me hold on. Let me just close all this stuff up and stop sharing. All right, here I am. Sorry, here we are. Okay,
Yeah.
back. Awesome. That was great. Thank you so much, Jake. That was fucking
No
awesome.
worries, man.
Is there anything else you want to say before we finish? And I mute my.
No, I just said this was a really good chat. I like the points you brought up as well, and I'd like to just delve into the next one, just get even better points, I think. Yeah.
Damn straight we will. It's going to be sick, man. I look forward to this. I'm really looking forward to this. Yeah, welcome to the, what did we call this? The journey of real magic, everybody. May you
Yes.
be blessed by the music of Apollo himself, who is the sun and God. All right.
Oh,
See
peace,
everybody.
everyone.